But yeah, so
Welcome everybody. Welcome. Let us tickle your ears today with a topic that is going to last. I don't know. This is part one. We're going to call it part one because I
this
don't
is deep.
know if you agree, Rob. I think you do. It's probably going to
Mhm.
be like 5, 6, 7, 12 parts.
Yeah, this is not a one-parter, let alone it's a topic that you could literally slice any way you want it. So,
Yep.
yeah, episode. I'll fill that in later. I have no idea what episode this is, but
Yep. And yeah, we
that-
won't call it, if you're talking about slicing it, then we'll call it, this is slice one.
there
Like
you go.
pie.
So, dads in real life, slice one, going down the rabbit hole of what's the topic of today, Travis? What are we talking about? What are we riffing on?
We are talking about the hustle. The hustle. And that can, like we said, can go many different directions, but I'm going to share some of our experience with it and yeah, see what we're riffing as per
Mhm.
the usual. And so
Mhm.
you've probably read books about it. Everybody who's listening, you probably heard about it. You probably know about it. Either you
Podcast
probably
about
maybe
it. Yeah.
some people are like, oh yeah, the hustle, and they're like, this is the right thing. This is
Yeah.
good. We're talking about good stuff. Some people are like, the hustle, ew, gross, not good. And so whatever your predisposed thoughts of what it is, this might be some similar conversations you've had with your friends that you've
Mhm.
talked to about this or you've read in books. But welcome to our chat about it.
Yeah, and actually, it's a great little like. Can you within parameters, right? Because hustle can mean a lot of things from a lot of people. Like, oh, I hustle at
Mm-hmm.
the gym. So, what are we talking about today as far as hustle? Hustle.
Uh, we are talking about, oh, you just cut out. I lost you. Oh, your mic. He's muted. You are.
Okay, that was interesting. Okay, back to it. So, because
You leaned in.
I
I
saw
think
it
you
on my
bumped
end
it.
too. I saw it on my end too. It was like, oh, your mic's off. I was like, I didn't touch anything, but I think I touched the mute button on the physical mic. But
Yep.
so what version of hustle are we? Because we want to put like context to this, right?
Yeah.
Hustle can be in school or working hard or working out hard or the
Yep.
grind. So what version of hustle are we going to talk about in this first episode of this version of this topic?
Within the context of us as dads, I think we're going to be diving in a bit into what, how we and how other people view a hustling parent, somebody who,
Okay.
but not just get from A to B kind of hustle. We're talking about the kind of provision hustle,
Mm,
the financial hustle.
the provider.
Let's talk about that today.
Okay.
So,
So, to kick it off, like when were you, not what age, but when did you first get introduced to that version of the hustle? Like, was it a parent? Was it a friend? Did you realize as an adult when you became a parent, as like, oh wow, I'm the quote unquote archetype breadwinner. So when did you first come across the hustle, and what was your first like reaction to that? Like, were you fond? Like, oh, I want to grind 14-hour days. Like, what was your reaction to it?
yeah. See, okay. So I love that you're asking me the question first because I know
Yep.
you have some things to share. Being an entrepreneur, having owned a business, some of these things,
Yep.
which I'm really excited to talk to you about. But for myself, honestly, you can help me frame this with other additional questions if you want,
Yeah.
because maybe let's dig into Travis past if we want. But I actually did not. I feel like I didn't grow up around that hustle mentality. I
Mm,
think the idea of having the side hustle or grinding to make more or be more successful financially. I don't think that really was a thing. But like, yeah, and I just noticed, I guess, as over the last decade, maybe over the last 10
mm,
years, I've
mm.
started to see everybody around me kind of just start embracing it more and more and more to the point where it's becoming a norm that you need to do this in order to be successful or in order to be happy, right? And we as a family have had to basically stake our flag, put our flag in the ground or draw the line in the sand and say, hey, this is how we're going to do life as our family, and these are the values that we have, and they might be a little antithetical to what other people value, of
Mhm.
course. And so I grew up, because we're kind of touching on this a bit, right? I grew up with the very traditional kind of like, my mom was home with us, my dad worked. And so he always left really early in the morning, went out to work, and then he was always pretty much home at the same time every day. So he
Mhm.
was just, it was very consistent. We knew that he worked hard. As kids, we didn't know what he did. The go to work day was super cool because we got to
Yeah.
go and see him in his cubicle,
Yeah.
and it was like, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, look
Yeah.
at this square that you have.
This is yours. All of this is yours, right?
Yeah, yeah, you have your own cave.
I remember that.
So I won't go down that rabbit hole, but yeah,
My
basically it
dad's
was like,
Batman. That's what it
yeah,
is.
yeah. I think it's. I knew. I expected. I as a dad, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna work. To provide for my family,
Mhm.
and provision equals, going and putting in the hours to make to be financially responsible, and like cover my family. And now here I am, full-time dad,
Mhm.
having to reframe what that looks like,
Mhm.
what success looks like, or what provision looks like,
I was gonna say that. What does provision?
because um yeah, we decided that that wasn't going to be a thing for us. So the reason I kind of started to talk about this in the previous episode was, I thought it was crazy. So we have kind of framed it. Our value is, hey, we want to be home with our kids, raising them. We realized years ago, like, wow, it's expensive for childcare, and so why would I go work a job to basically just to pay for them to be raised by someone else? That's really, like, it was like equal.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
wasn't like rolling in the cash or anything, so it wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna have to turn down,
Yeah. This
however X amount of
CEO
money.
position. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So best decision ever. We have loved that decision. And so um again, I don't want anybody out there to feel like I'm putting them down or saying like this is the right exact
Oh,
way.
no, no.
It's just for me, I've been having to reframe, hey, what does this look like for myself? So that's where I'm at.
Mhm.
And so I've worked at a couple jobs in the past that have had this kind of pride that comes with the hustle, like, hey,
Position.
yeah, like we work hard, and so they're like, and we're gonna reap the benefits, but if you don't hustle, then you're doing something wrong.
Mhm.
So that's that's that. And then the only other thing I would add to this, as far as like just my context of this, is I was just really kind of blown away with a conversation I overheard a while back, because I realized this person that was talking was kind of inferring like, they're kind of better than we are, just because they work hard, and they have the money to show for it. So
Mhm.
hey, I got the money to show for it, so that proves that maybe,
I'm
Travis,
worth it.
maybe you should work harder and
Mhm.
hustle more, so that you can be a better human being or something like that. And I was like, I wasn't in this conversation, this wasn't directed at me, but it was just like, I was thinking about it, I was like, what? Oh man, this is crazy. This is kind of new for me. I didn't know that that was a thing, but it makes sense, I guess, in the entrepreneurial spirit of America. That has kind of weaved its way into, hey, and I'm not saying it's all bad. Like, there should certainly be pride in the work that you do and all that.
Well, like you said, I want to like preface this is like we're not saying like do this, don't do that. We're just sharing like our storylines, right? Our arcs, and hopefully we share tidbits that may be you're along kind of the same path, and it gives you insight. We're not saying like grind culture is bad. No, like I don't believe anything necessarily is bad. I think when it's unnoticed or uncontrollable, that's when we kind of get into this kind of danger zone thing. So like, hey, some people make more zeros. Awesome. If that's how you creates self-worth, then more power to you. But that's not how I do it. Or I've known Travis for a while now. That's not what Travis does to identify like his three core kind of foundations. Like for some, financial security, success is measured by financial security and your role, then great. That's awesome. And you're probably going to look for friends in that similar space or wants and needs. Whereas if you realize that like you're fishing, right? I always use this analogy. Like you could be fishing and you seeing like the guy next to you, the other guy next to you fishing, and their hooks are getting bit, and you just realize I'm fishing in the wrong pond. Like it's not that I'm less of a fisherman. It's not that my rod's any worse. It's like I'm not fishing for their fish. I'm not looking to use finances as a berry marker for self-worth or for my circle of friends or for anything. And so I think the sooner you can come to that realization, or the sooner you can kind of define like what you and Deb did, like, hey, what are we about? What are three things that are like our non-negotiables, right? And I think that'll kind of cater all the decisions in the future, be it financial or not. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
for you then to turn the question
a
around.
little different. Yeah. So I grew up in city life. So externally to my home, I saw the hustle and bustle. I saw the expensive cars and the condos, and you know, as a young man, I'm like, that would be awesome. And all I saw was the results. I didn't know the effort, time, sacrifices, cost that goes into the results. And most of the time we don't, growing up as young men, right? We just see, I want the car, I want the house, I want that checkbook, like I want all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, I grew up with an entrepreneurial dad. So a little bit different than going to work in the morning, coming back late. He would be gone for weeks, if not months, right? Traveling and living, I would say kind of like the movie 1950s lifestyle, and was the provider. And so his language for love was literally to be the financial provider. That's how we saw love in the household, was the fact that we had a roof overhead, you know, food on the plate, which by all means, awesome. It definitely worked. But it also planted a seed of like, hey, you know, I want that expensive suit. Where'd you get that tie? I want to look important. I want people to look for me, right? And so I grew up always in the back of my head itching like, okay, what do I need to do to be quote unquote successful? And at that time, successful was tied to finances, right? What you owned, material things. And so I went throughout high school like, okay, already having the colleges picked up, knowing what major starts with a 6-figure after graduating, went to an entrepreneurship school, right? Had all these dreams and aspirations, came out, started a business, did all this. But what, like I mentioned before, what I didn't see was the cost of that, of the hustle culture. And as a single man, I loved the hustle culture. I loved working 14-hour days. I love closing new sales. I love buying expensive stuff. But because it was just me, right? Selfishly, it was just me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as soon as I got to an age where I was in a relationship, a partnership, and eventually became a dad, and that's kind of like what we're talking about, like, how do you approach hustle culture as a parent? The cost was not worth it for me. And I remember distinctly like 14-hour days, coaching classes with a baby Bjorn with our firstborn, and then our firstborn in a crib while we had a second kid on me, and trying to make it all happen because I was young and I had the energy. But you don't know the costs relationship wise with your spouse. You don't know the cost with your kids. You don't know the cost with your health, burning the candle at both ends. And this was what I mentioned when we first started the podcast, is hustle culture is not a bad thing. Like I said, it's when it goes uncontrollable, right? When it starts to fester and then it starts to influence other things. That's when I think we need to sit back. So for me, after 12 years as an entrepreneur with one of these businesses, I had to have that talk. I had to talk with my wife. I was like, hey, I can keep going down this path, financial freedom, all that good stuff. But the path also leads to potentially divorce, right? Separation, not knowing your kids very well, not having a circle of friends because your friends needed to fit a certain criteria, other business owners, right? Other financially independent people. And so that's when I had that aha moment where it's like, hey, growing up, I wanted all the results of it, without the costs. And as soon as I lived the costs, I realized it wasn't worth it. It wasn't what my spouse and I wanted. And so we dialed it back. We realized lack of boundaries, and all the other stuff, which we can talk about in episode 2, 3, 4, 5 of this. But I think as a dad, my priority, right, the three kind of base pillars was family comes first for us. And because we didn't have a family before, the job could come first. But as soon as we have a family, right, you have to pick and choose. And I didn't want to pick between my family and signing on a new client, or my family and going to a competition on a Sunday, or my family and potentially a new corporate client. Like, I didn't want to have those discussions anymore because it wasn't fair to my partner. Like, going into entrepreneurship, we had an honest discussion of like, what are we willing to sacrifice and where do we draw the line in the sand? And 12 years later, we came up across that line in the sand. And so we made some people might say hard decision, but in retrospective, it was a very easy decision, right? Because of the relationship I have with my kids now, the relationship I have with my partner. I'm still being of service in the industry that I'm in, but it's without the false idol of hustle. Like, I need to work longer than you because that gives me self-worth. I need to make more money than you because that gives me my identity. Right now, my identity is solidified in my family, right? It's solidified in the people that I help. But that shift didn't come until maturity, until I was a man, until I had family. And fortunately enough, I was able to catch it early on, right? It's kind of like catching a cold, like taking some medicine before it got to a point where real hard life decisions had to be made with my spouse, with the kids. And so for me, hustle culture was the dream. It was, I wanted the suit and tie. I wanted that expensive car, but without understanding the cost. And then living through hustle culture, I was fine as an independent, selfish solopreneur. But once you add in family, blood related or not blood related, close friends, and you realize the sacrifices you need to make, you need to kind of have a sit down like, hey, like, where do I want to be a year from now, 5 years? Do I want those friends, those family members to still be in that circle? And then what are the costs? What are the trade-offs? Because everything has a cost. Being right, a dad, stay-at-home parent, there's a cost. There's definitely a cost. But for us, it's worth the cost. So being an entrepreneur as I was in that specific, like, let's say, lane, it got to a point where the cost outweighed the benefit. And so that's just my storyline. Some people are still hustling and grinding and they can manage having multiple kids and multiple businesses. More power to you. If you're listening to this, that's awesome. I'd love to learn from you. But for right now, in this season of life, that's not the chapter I'm reading, right? That's not what I'm writing. That's not my story arc anymore. I wanted to be Superman and Batman. I wanted to be all that growing up. Now I just want to be the man I am. I want to be the man for my kids. I want to be the man for my spouse, and everything else kind of plays second fiddle, right? Like, that's not the priority anymore. But it took a lot of maturity, a lot of time, a lot of baptism through fire to kind of realize, like, okay, what is really important to me? And hustle culture is no longer important. It no longer defines me. At which time in the past it did. So that's kind of the storyline. That's where I am now. That's where I came from. But yeah, if you have any questions on that, you can leave in the comments. Or Travis, if you have anything that you're like, ooh, let's dive a little bit deeper on that, I'm always an open book about that. So
Yeah. And so, I mean, now I would say as a dad, now I'm so curious if I'm getting distracted. I'm so curious. Can you hear like
I do.
a clock tower in the distance?
It's beautiful. I used to have one growing up. So
this actually happened in the last episode too, and I don't know if it even came through or not because you were talking.
Yeah, I didn't
hear
it.
Yeah, well, and I have the earbuds in now. Yeah, I inherited a clock from my late grandparents recently, and it's cool because I remember this clock sitting around, but I'm fiddling with like how much do I want to hear it. But now the kids love it. Every time they're like, count the dings. Oh, it's 4 o'clock. So
math.
We roll with it, but then I forget when I'm in here and we're doing the podcast. Oh, that's probably going to go off. which actually is pretty crazy because that means that I'm just about out of
I know.
time.
I was going to say it's about time that we can
Holy
close.
cow. Well, so okay, so again, this is slice one of this
Exactly.
pie that we're diving into that we're gonna to chew on
Hmm.
more. So this is really, we can title it the origin story.
Yeah.
The origins of what we experience in
Hmm.
this hustle realm. Now, I would say here's some questions, here's some thoughts that we can talk about in the
Ooh.
future. But
Let's go.
there are studies, I think that I've seen out there that talk about. I'm going to provide a little bit of pushback in the
Mhm,
sense
of
of
course.
to those listening who might find themselves in that category of like, heck yeah, I'm proud of it. I own
Mhm.
10 businesses and I do this stuff. I'm not saying that is uh, I'm not. I want to point out, but that I'm not saying that that's a bad thing in and of itself. That's pretty amazing that you did those things. But lots of studies out there that we're seeing now that show that there's a certain point in income that
Oh
you
yeah, we
hit
talked
and
about
it
this.
doesn't equal happiness anymore, right? So, and it's something crazy. It's like 75,000 or like 90,000, depending on what state you're in, obviously, right? Cost of living. But um, after that, it doesn't necessarily equal happiness. So, I guess the pushback, the question I would ask is like, what is that? What is that? If you are a hustler, uh,
What's that
what
number?
is that bringing? No,
Yeah.
I mean, like, what's coming from that fulfills you,
Hmm.
or what purpose is that serving in your life, really, I
Hmm.
guess. um and then, yeah, I would definitely call myself not very much a hustler, but I still fall. I realize the culture of hustle altogether that
Hmm.
we'll talk about more is this it affects all of us, right? Like,
Hmm.
I know with moms, especially, big time, moms are getting hit with like the guilt, the mom guilt of
Hmm.
like, oh, you should be doing this with your kids and this with your kids and this with your kids. And us as dads don't necessarily, even stay at home or like full-time dads,
Hmm.
we're not really getting that, right? Like, we're getting the pat on the back at the store in line, like, oh, you got three right now, you're super dad. And then, the moms at three, they're like, get out of my way, what are you doing, your kids are
Yeah,
all
exactly.
causing a ruckus. So
Yeah.
it's not fair. We're not fair here. But then as dads, like, I'm being a dad, like, there's tons of value that brings, right?
Mhm.
Of course, like, I can fix our house when things break. I have that time, that margin.
Mhm.
I'm raising our kids with my wife, but
Mhm.
like, I'm present. I don't have a
Yeah.
job like
And you talk
weighing
about the
down.
cost, right? The
Yeah.
cost of being away 8 hours a day. There's a cost. Maybe not for you, but for your kids and for your spouse, there is a cost.
So I've had to unwind this like narrative in my head that says, well, Travis, you need to bring in some financial
Mm.
like, so Deb had to tell me a little while ago. She's like, hey, I've noticed you keep saying like you only cost us money. And
Mm.
that's not how you should be seeing yourself, as far as success goes, right?
Mhm. Or
And so that
contribution,
was
right?
a
Like your
contribution.
contribution
Yeah.
is not just financially, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that has been a challenge, and that's something, I guess, yeah, we can dive into more
Oh,
of
we
like,
will,
I'm
sir.
just like, oh, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna make more money on the side when I have a chance, So
Mhm. We'll
um
talk about that. We'll talk about the kind of that push pull, right? Like
yeah,
as creatives, we still want to do good work, right? We still want to
yeah,
to be providing for, but like what does that look like now? What can that look like now? And so we can
yep,
definitely go down that rabbit hole on a future episode.
yep. So that will do it for today. Remember,
Yeah.
everybody, we are not professionals.
No, we're not gurus. We're just two dads
Dudes in
in
real
real life. I
life.
feel like we need a jingle, but we'll work on that.
Yeah, I would like that. I can pull out my little baby keyboard.
There
Beep
you go.
boop beep boop.